Thanks, Julie. It's an honor to be here. It really is to speak with Julie and with Sarah. As usual, you're much too kind. And I was really bummed to miss last year, so I thought when Julie invited me, there was no possible way I would do it this year. And so this is really a talk about culture change, is what I would say. There's going to be a lot of brilliant speakers who are on this subject, but I want to start by asking a simple but not easy question. Take a second and try to answer this question for yourself, right? What are the one or maximum two guiding light, organizing principles or motivating ideas that you would say have defined the practice of UX research for the last year? Really think to yourself. You don't get more than one or two. I hope you have them in mind. I wish we had a chance to go around. We do not have that time. But I am going to tell you what I think my answer is, and I'm curious if you agree. I think it's actually two ideas. The first one, user-centered empathy, right? We made understanding users and customers our calling card. We led with empathy. We are leading with empathy. We made it a core job. We make it a core job to bring user voices into the product and the design process. And who could argue, right? Our focus should be on users, and our empathetic approach is important. I do worry that we might have defined our value a little narrowly. But there's a second idea. I would say it's methodological rigor. We doubled down on rigor in the last 15 years. We pushed the discipline to focus on the integrity of methods as a defining characteristic. We wanted to tie our rigor directly to company value. And again, I don't think that's wrong. I just think it's inside baseball, if you know the phrase. Like, too navel-gazy, a little inward focus. Who gives a crap about your rigor if your insights didn't get put into action? The answer is no one. No one gives a crap. And so those two ideas, I think, have brought us to the last couple of years, or as you may have heard them called, the reckoning. And so originally when Julie asked me to do this, she asked me to take the theme like the reckoning a year later, which I'm not doing. Honestly, I can't even say that word anymore. So we're just going to call it the R word, if you're OK with that. And we'll go ahead. And so I wrote an article last year that used the R word. And the crux of the idea is that there's a shift in this moment, some change in the winds, a thing we might want to notice, right? And I would say it's brought about primarily by at least three things. One is macro level shifts in the economic environment. The second would be, I would say, democratization of digital tools on the one hand, and then on the other hand, companies spending every last nickel they own on NVIDIA chips and AI services, but also some of our own shortcomings as a discipline. And so, look, even if we disagree on some of the causes and details, in the last year plus, I would say, I wonder if we're coming to some consensus, a consensus at least, that the ideas that got us here might not get us there. And if that's true, here's the next question. What ideas will define the next 15 years of our future? I want to hear your takes over the next few days. We got time together. I want to hear all the spicy and non-spicy takes. This is my talk, though, so I'm going to tell you I have an answer, of course, and we'll talk about it quite a bit at this conference. I think a reorienting of research and UX overall, not just research, but UX writ large, to focus on making businesses successful has to be the big idea of the next 50 years. Not abandoning user-centrism or empathy or rigor by any stretch, but realizing they're primarily valuable as a means to an end, not an end in themselves. And I would argue that is a huge culture change for us. And one way we can help get there is to recast ourselves. We are business people. We are product people who just happen to be researchers. And we have all those unique and powerful characteristics of our discipline. I do think that we could stand to become much more eager capitalists, but I would argue we are not that. Far from it. In the aftermath of writing about the R word last year, I would say the most surprising thing to me was the size of the anti-capitalist group. People who seemed very deeply skeptical of the idea that UX research could benefit from leaning hard into driving profit. And I've thought a lot about why that is. This is a culture change. And I have a hypothesis I'd like to try out on you. Tell me if you agree. I think many of our partners in our work, product, eng, DS, even design sometimes, it's like they're looking through a keyhole. Usually they see a narrow slice of engagement or revenue, whatever we can measure. We're limited by the view inside the company, right? In that echo chamber, it's like looking through a keyhole. So from here, it looks, perhaps you can see what I'm about to do. It looks like a lovely family, maybe on a fall day, that golden light, walking through the park on a sunny fall day. But we're researchers. Our job is not to look through the keyhole, but to get outside the building, both literally and figuratively, to hear those voices and bring them in. So it necessarily brings us into view of the broader perspective. And we see the good and the bad. We see the good and the bad. If that's where you live in your job, and we see the full ecosystem of consequences, but you see everybody else looking through the keyhole, talking just about the sweet family in the park, but not the apocalyptic burning city, it can breed a lot of anger and cynicism. What's wrong with you profit-focused people? Raise your heads, look around. And so I think our job in this new phase, as I see it, is primarily to bring that ecosystem of consequences back into the fold, not to reject the need for profit, but to help companies balance it. And I would say getting people to widen their perspective isn't likely to succeed by talking down to them or rejecting their primary system, profit. What if we used our big research brains to think about how to smartly introduce that range of consequences, not as a substitute for profit, but to show how businesses can be stronger and better in the long run when they take it all into account. Cool. How do we do it, Judd? I don't know, but here's a couple of ideas. 2 action-oriented ideas that I think will help us on this journey. 1, use our research powers to understand our colleagues and the social dynamics of work in order to drive more business success. And 2, a relentless focus on integrating insights with decision-making processes and those people that we work with. So I'm going to talk briefly about these 2 things, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. Colleagues, not users is really about turning the powerful skills of understanding we're already using internally. Think about everything you know about user-centered design and that process, but instead of users, think colleague. Interestingly, the best leaders I know do this naturally. I teach a graduate class on leadership and management at UC Berkeley with this as the central theme, right? And I can tell you that it's not a new idea. I didn't make it up. The research supports this. We need to be researchers of our colleagues and the social dynamics of work first, much more than we are, and we're so well equipped to do it. A lot of this is getting everyone pulling in the same direction when we don't have any formal authority, right? So how do we do it? I'm inspired by the Cohen-Bradford model. How many have heard of the Cohen-Bradford model? Nobody. Cool. This is based on a 1989 book by Alan Cohen and David Bradford called Influence Without Authority. Maybe you've heard of that. So they echo like 50 years of good social psych before them when they say the key to influence is mutually beneficial exchange of currency, where currency is just shorthand for stuff people want. It's they say that getting things done, being in charge, even when you're not in charge, is all about figuring out what currencies matter to your colleagues and then matching them to the ones that matter to you, not the other way around. So they're saying there are 5 types of currency, and they're not mutually exclusive. And our job, which we're so well equipped to do, is to be students of our colleagues, to uncover these currencies, to answer questions like these, because mutually beneficial exchanges of currency help us make allies, give us authority, put us in a position to be deciders, not just to provide materials for other people's decision-making processes, but to be there ourselves in that seat. Which seat? The seat in the meeting room, that seat at the table, for example, which, by the way, is like a factory for the raw materials you need for that kind of leadership. Everybody hates meetings sometimes. I hate meetings. But if you think of them as a primary venue for research, you can make them fun and useful again, right? So you notice things that you're naturally equipped to notice. Who speaks? In what order? Allies and adversaries in that meeting, and how do they show up? How do people arrange themselves? Who do they sit with and where? Body language. What I call arousal cues, which I'm looking for now, which is that thing where you look bored, but then all of a sudden I said something and you perked up and I know there's something going on in your head. Arousal cues in meetings are huge. We should learn and teach these things to our team. We should focus on them, but we don't. And of course, language. It's a key to understanding colleagues. This is not surprising. Knowing that framing is a clue to unspoken values, priorities, and goals. We're used to this already. The newer part is what we do with it. And this is about mirroring language, which is one of the most important things we can do to signal to our colleagues, I'm listening, we're allies, you can trust me, we're in the in-group together. So we put our ideas, our insights in the language of our colleagues. It's the number one way to get them on board. Sharing insights using other people's language, the colleagues around us, we're enrolling them in our insight. We're telling them, this is yours and mine, not mine. I'm not trying to convince you of it. Again, most of us do this naturally, but we have to be intentional about doing it at work. I have one more big idea to share, which kind of adds a step to the research process and suggests that we put a lot of focus there. So it's like pretty ridiculous that I would suggest that. But I would say typically we might think, here's an abstracted research process, like research design, data collection, synthesis analysis. Maybe this is a replacement for the thing that normally comes after, where you tell somebody about it. But I would add this step and call it integration. And I would say it's the one that really matters, right? It's the one where we work the system so effectively that we actually drive change with insight, right? Think of yourself as having that job, working the system. And by the system, I mean your system of work at your company, in your context. This is the only reason I have a job as a consultant, is because I tend to go in and say, your system is messed up. And they're like, we know. And I'm like, cool, you can exploit it in the following way. And they're like, oh, and then we get things done. But not that it's so obvious to anybody, including me, but that is what it takes to get insights into action. And this is work we cannot do by ourselves, right? Insights don't do this work by ourselves. We have to put this to work by effectively working and operating with how our company is operating. And I think it takes three things to do that. First idea, pointed. Outstanding, pointed, action-oriented insights. And this is going back to a critique I made last year when I wrote about the R word, which is I think we do far too much research I would call middle range, this kind of landscapey, generalized user understanding, God forbid how might we's. It's the least pointed thing on the planet. To drive the business, we have to be much more pointed than that. Understanding and empathy is necessary but insufficient. It is not enough. We have to make recommendations that drive action and profit, and they have to be so specific. But in my consulting work, I often hear from product engineering colleagues that they hate it sometimes when researchers make recommendations. So why do they hate it? Number one, because sometimes we're naive and our recommendations don't take things like what the business needs into account, value and viability and feasibility, right? We're stuck in that user-centered only perspective. And the second reason sometimes they hate it is because it isn't collaborative, right? They're like, whoa, slow down, Ranger, right? Shouldn't we be deciding on recommendations together? You just think you did all the work for us? And so that's what matched means to me. Number one, user and business goals matched smartly together, articulated in the language of the business because we bothered to learn. We can all read the P&L and understand all those acronyms. We listened to the shareholders call. We sought out every OKR and we are knowledgeable. And we consider not just what's valuable to users, but also what's viable for the business, what's a viable business, and what's feasible given constraints in technology. But then second, matched with our colleagues. So this is like flying in formation, right? All the research we did to understand social dynamics and relationships and currencies, this is where we put it to use. It's just good collaboration, but we can be the ones who lead it, right? So that pointed recommendations are on time and on target. We got everybody aligned with them in advance. We did the pre-work. We had the conversation. This is about working the system so that we can land it, right? Framed in ways that are powerful and appropriate, delivered to colleagues just right, inserted into the system with full knowledge of the social dynamics, who's more or less influential and why. We are working the system so hard. And I feel like there's a few key aspects to this. The first one is certainly being better communicators. Again, I would say in my consulting work, I often work with research teams and I see their research materials. And so much research is still so milquetoast, right? Wordy, technical, long, boring as shit, no wow factor, no effort to market the idea, ineffective framing, not mirroring language, or trying to be mindful of the social situation in any way. Why are we still communicating this way and expecting it to change? But also showing up effectively in different settings, right? Confidently driving home an insight in an email, in a one-on-one, in a stand-up, in the board of directors meeting, and adapting appropriately. And then using all those insights that we learned in our internal research process to enroll our colleagues, so that it's not just us arguing for a balance of what users need and what the business, but we're all doing it together. Incepting people that we work with is this model of success in that environment. If you'll forgive the pun, I think we're really at a fork in the road here. Up until this point, I think many companies have seen research as a cost center, but we need to shift to being a profit center. Ourselves, not the insights, but us. Not research as a precondition for somebody else making decisions or making money, but us as direct drivers of that. One other great thing about it is that no matter what, the AI will never, we cannot be replaced in that role. So there's a lot to do, but the good news is I think we're really well equipped to do it. We're well on our way. This is happening already. We're here at this conference talking about these ideas. We are a learning discipline. Who better than us to make this shift? We have strong leaders, brilliant people, and this is happening already. And so with that, I want to pass the mic to Sarah.